I swear I never thought I'd be that girl you know, the one sleeping with a married man and lying about birth control, but here I am, stuck in the messiest situation of my life. I'm Tiana, 28, and this whole disaster started at my new job last year. Listen, when Deshaun first started coming around my desk with those coffee breaks and lunch invites, I actually thought he was just being friendly to the new girl. Tall, fine as hell, with this deep laugh that made everyone in the office turn their heads. I noticed his wedding ring right away. But he kept dropping these little comments about how his marriage was basically done, and they were staying together for the kids. He'd come to my desk looking all stressed, talking about how his wife Keisha didn't understand him anymore, how they hadn't been intimate in months, all that classic married man garbage that somehow I still fell for. The first time we kissed was after the holiday party. We were the last two in the parking garage, and one thing led to another until we were making out against my car like teenagers. After that, it was like we couldn't stop meeting at this hotel off the highway, sneaking out for client lunches that were really just us getting a room for an hour, texting all hours of the night when his wife was asleep. When things started getting more serious, he asked if I was on birth control, and I don't know what came over me, but I lied and said yes, I just didn't want anything to ruin what we had. Truth is, I'd stopped taking it months before because of how it was affecting my mood, but something in me just wanted to keep him close, to not give him any reason to pull away. Every time he'd talk about leaving Keisha, my heart would race thinking about us finally being together for real. He'd show me pictures of his 3 kids, 2 girls, and a boy saying how they'd love me once they got to know me, how we'd be a family someday soon. I started imagining this whole life with him, even though deep down I knew I was just the side chick. Our routine became so normal. He'd tell Keisha he was working late, come to my place, and we'd order takeout, watch movies, and act like what we were doing wasn't destroying a whole family. We started getting careless. I'd leave marks on his neck. He'd forget his watch at my place. We'd go to restaurants where we might get caught. Almost like part of me wanted his wife to find out, so he'd finally have to choose. I knew we were playing with fire, but I convinced myself that what we had was real love, that we were meant to be together, and that his marriage really was as broken as he claimed. He had a way of making me feel like I was saving him from this terrible home life, like I was the only good thing he had. I even started looking at engagement rings online, imagining the day he'd finally be free to be with me. The sex was amazing, but it was those quiet moments after that really got me hooked, when he'd talk about our future, about buying a house together, about starting fresh. Every time he'd leave to go back to his real life, I'd feel this emptiness that only got filled when my phone would light up with his messages, telling me how much he missed me already. Looking back, I can see all the red flags. Know how he never took me anywhere his friends might be, how he was always the one to decide when we could see each other, how he'd get defensive whenever I'd ask when exactly he planned to leave Keisha. But at the time, I was too caught up in the fantasy, too invested in the idea that I was special, that our relationship was different from all the other affairs that never work out. The day I found out I was pregnant, I threw up twice, once from the morning sickness and again from pure panic. I'd been feeling off for weeks but kept pushing it aside, blaming it on stress from work and all the sneaking around. When those 2 lines showed up on the test, my whole body went cold. I sat on my bathroom floor for an hour, just staring at that little plastic stick that was about to blow up my entire situation. I couldn't even cry, I was too shocked. When I finally called Deshaun, my voice was shaking so bad he thought something terrible had happened, and I guess it had. The silence on the phone after I told him lasted so long I thought he'd hung up. "You said you were on birth control," he finally whispered, his voice a mix of anger and fear that made my stomach drop even further. I broke down then, confessing that I'd lied, watching his face on FaceTime shift from shock to disappointment to something that scared miscalculation. He said he needed time to think, and I spent the next 3 days in absolute hell, imagining him confessing everything to Keisha, or worse, just disappearing from my life completely. When he finally came over, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "I can't leave Keisha right now," he said, pacing my living room. "The timing's all wrong. Her mom's sick. Work's crazy. The kids' school year just started." But then he took my hands, looking into my eyes with what seemed like genuine care, and promised he would leave soon, that he just needed to prepare everyone for the changes coming. I wanted to believe him so badly that I ignored the voice in my head screaming that I was being played. He started coming over more often, bringing me prenatal vitamins, ordering me healthy food, talking about names, acting like a real partner whenever it was convenient for him. The first ultrasound, he couldn't make it because of a school thing with his son, but he seemed genuinely sad to miss it and asked for pictures right away. I started buying baby things in secret, hiding them in my closet, building this nest for a future that felt more uncertain every day despite his promises. His excuses for not telling Keisha got more elaborate now they were in couples therapy to make the separation easier. Now they had family visiting. Now wasn't a good time because she's been stressed at work. Even as my belly grew, his timeline for leaving kept stretching further in the distance. But every time I'd get frustrated and threaten to tell Keisha myself, he'd remind me how much I'd hurt the kids, how Keisha might make it impossible for us to be together if she found out this way. So I kept waiting, kept believing, kept growing his child inside me while he went home every night to the family he already had. As my pregnancy progressed, something weird started happening. I got more attached to Deshaun than ever, while he seemed to be pulling away. By my second trimester, I was completely in love with this baby and the fantasy future I'd built in my head. I'd send him daily updates about every kick, every doctor's visit, every little development, and his responses got shorter and less frequent. Still, on the weekends when he could slip away, he'd come over and rub cocoa butter on my stretching belly, talking to our baby about how Daddy was going to teach them to play basketball. Those moments felt so real that I could push away the reality of what was happening, that I was 6 months pregnant with a married man's baby, and still a secret. I started showing too much to keep working without questions, so I told everyone at the office the father was an ex who wasn't in the picture. Deshaun played along perfectly, acting just concerned enough about the pregnant lady around coworkers without giving anything away. The lies were exhausting, but I was in too deep to see any other way forward. His excuses for not leaving Keisha had evolved into elaborate scenarios. They were waiting until after his daughter's dance recital. Now they had this family vacation plan that would be the perfect opportunity to tell everyone it's over. I started nesting hard in my apartment, setting up a nursery in my second bedroom, buying all these cute little outfits, throwing myself a secret baby shower with just my 2 closest friends who knew the real situation and didn't judge me too harshly. When Deshaun saw the nursery for the first time, he got real quiet, and I caught this look on his face: fear, guilt, maybe even regret, before he covered it with a smile and said everything looked perfect. 7 months in, his visits started coming with conditions. His phone stayed in his pocket on silent. He couldn't stay the night anymore because Keisha was getting suspicious. He couldn't take any baby-related calls at work. Once, I overheard him on the phone telling Keisha he was working late when he was lying right next to me, and the casual way he lied made me wonder how many times he'd done the same to me. I started having these nightmares where I was giving birth alone in my apartment while calling Deshaun's phone, which just rang and rang. But then he'd show up the next day with a stuffed animal for the baby or a pregnancy pillow for me, and I'd convince myself again that everything would work out. Even as my due date approached, his promises about leaving got vaguer after the baby comes, shifted to once things settle down, shifted to when the time is right. I started to realize that the fantasy I'd built wasn't just about me and Deshaun anymore. Now there was this innocent baby involved who deserved better than being someone's dirty secret. But every time I tried to picture raising this child alone, without him, my chest would tighten until I couldn't breathe. So I kept clinging to his promises like they were the only thing keeping me afloat. The day I went into labor, Deshaun was at some family BBQ he couldn't get out of. My water broke at 3 a.m., and I called him 7 times before he finally answered, whispering that he couldn't talk. I was doubled over with contractions, screaming that his baby was coming now, and this fool had the nerve to ask if I could hold off until he could make an excuse to leave. I ended up calling an Uber to the hospital and checked in alone, crying from both the pain and the humiliation of not having anyone to hold my hand. Deshaun finally showed up 4 hours later, looking stressed and saying he'd told Keisha he had an emergency at work. By then, I was already 6 centimeters dilated and too exhausted to even curse him out properly. I'll give him this much: once he was there, he was fully present, coaching me through every contraction, not looking at his phone even once. When our daughter finally arrived, all 7 pounds, 2 ounces of perfect brown skin and tiny fingers, the look on his face was worth every second of pain. He cried real tears, holding her like she was made of glass, whispering that she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He even stayed the night at the hospital, sending Keisha some lie about a work crisis requiring an overnight shift. Those first few days with Zaria were this strange bubble of almost happiness, with Deshaun coming by whenever he could, bringing diapers and takeout, helping with night feedings, acting like a real father. But reality crashed back when he missed her first pediatrician appointment because Keisha was asking too many questions about his late hours. The juggling act got even more complicated. Now he was hiding not just an affair, but a whole child from his wife and kids. He set up this elaborate system where he had a second phone just for me and Zaria, kept a change of clothes in his car to avoid bringing baby spit up home, and developed this whole schedule of when he could safely visit based on Keisha's work hours. The most twisted part was how he'd FaceTime with us when he was supposedly at work, showing such genuine love to Zaria, then go home and act like we didn't exist. I started getting bitter, watching my daughter grow and change while her half-siblings didn't even know she existed. The secrecy that once felt exciting now felt suffocating. Zaria deserved a real father, not someone who could only acknowledge her existence during specific hours of the day. By the time she was 3 months old, I'd started dropping hints about child support, about making our situation official somehow. Deshaun would get defensive, reminding me that he was buying diapers and formula, that he was here, wasn't he? But here meant twice a week for a few hours, while Keisha and their kids got him every night and weekend. I started taking pictures of him with Zaria, partly as memories for her, partly as insurance for myself. I knew it was wrong, this collecting of evidence, but motherhood had made me both softer and harder. I'd do anything to protect my daughter's future, even if it meant blowing up the fragile arrangement we had. The worst part was, despite everything, I still loved him, still believed on some level that eventually he'd choose us. I'd watch him rock Zaria to sleep, singing the same songs he probably sang to his other kids, and my heart would break and heal in the same moment. It all came crashing down last Tuesday, and girl, when I tell you it was a disaster, I'm not even doing it justice. Zaria was 6 months old, and I'd finally had enough of being the secret shadow family. I'd been saving screenshots of our texts, pictures of Deshaun with the baby, even recordings of him promising to leave Keisha soon. Not my proudest moments, but desperation makes you do crazy things. That morning, Deshaun came by before work to see Zaria, and he was being extra sweet, talking about maybe taking a day off next week so we could go to the zoo. Just the 3 of us. As he was leaving, he said something about a work dinner that night, and how he'd try to swing by after. Something in his voice didn't sound right, and after 6 months of motherhood and almost 2 years of being his side piece, my intuition was on high alert. So I did something I'd never done before. I followed him. I got my neighbor to watch Zaria, got in my car, and trailed his Audi at a distance. Instead of heading to his office downtown, this man drove straight to a jewelry store in the mall. I watched from the parking lot as he went inside and came out 20 minutes later with a small bag. My hands were shaking as I kept following him, expecting him to head home to Keisha with whatever gift he'd bought her. Instead, he drove to an apartment complex I'd never seen before and parked. I pulled into a visitor spot where I could watch his car, and then almost passed out when I saw him get out, straighten his tie, and head inside with the jewelry bag. It took me about 10 seconds to realize what was happening. This wasn't about Keisha at all. There was someone else. I sat there for almost an hour, crying and feeling like the biggest fool alive, before I made my decision. I drove straight to the address I'd once looked up when I was feeling particularly insecure: Deshaun and Keisha's house. It was a nice 2-story in a family neighborhood, with bikes in the driveway and one of those basketball hoops that can be raised or lowered depending on the kid's height. I sat in my car for another 20 minutes, my whole body trembling as I tried to decide if I was really going to do this. Then I saw her Keisha coming out to get the mail. She was beautiful, with this short natural haircut and a casual elegance even in just jeans and a t-shirt. She looked nothing like the monster Deshawn had described during all those late-night complaints. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my phone with all my evidence and Zarya's birth certificate showing Deshawn as the father, and I walked up to their front door. When she answered, her polite smile of confusion is something I'll never forget. "Can I help you?" she asked, and my rehearsed speech disappeared. "I'm Tiana," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I've been seeing your husband for almost 2 years, and this is our daughter Zarya. I just found out he's cheating on both of us. It's been a week since everything exploded, and I'm still picking up the pieces of my shattered life." The look on Keisha's face when I showed her the pictures of Deshawn with Zarya first disbelief, then this deep pain that made me feel like the worst person alive, then something harder. A kind of resolve that almost scared me. She invited me in, which was the last thing I expected, and calmly asked to see everything I had while her 3 kids played upstairs, completely unaware that their world was about to change forever. We sat at her kitchen table, the one Deshawn had described complaining about dinner at so many times, and compared notes, dates, lies he'd told each of us. Turns out their marriage wasn't basically over at all. They'd just renewed their vows on their 10th anniversary 6 months before he started pursuing me. The couples therapy they were supposedly in to ease their separation, actually dates she thought they were going on to strengthen their marriage. All those nights he was working late, she'd believed him completely, trusted him without question, and the most devastating part? She was 3 months pregnant with their 4th childa pregnancy Deshawn had been thrilled about, according to her. So while he was helping me set up Zarya's nursery, he was also painting the new baby's room in their house a soft yellow. She didn't scream or call me names. She just sat there, absently rubbing her small baby bump, asking questions with this eerie calmness that somehow made everything worse. When Deshawn finally came home that night, he walked into a living room where his wife, his mistress, and his secret baby were all waiting. I've never seen someone's face drain of color so completely he actually had to grab the wall to steady himself. What followed was 2 hours of the most painful conversation I've ever been part of, him desperately trying to explain, to minimize, to salvage something from the wreckage, while Keisha just stared at him with eyes that had moved past sadness into something colder. I learned things about him I never knew, that this wasn't his first affair, just the first one that resulted in a child, that the mysterious apartment I'd followed him to belonged to a woman named Jasmine, who he'd been seeing for 3 months, that the jewelry was a necklace for her birthday. By the time I left, Keisha had asked him to move out immediately, and he was begging her to reconsider, not even looking at me or Zarya anymore. I drove home in a daze, feeling like I'd woken up from a 2-year dream into a nightmare reality. The text started that night, Deshawn blaming me for ruining his life, for not giving him time to handle things his way, then pivoting to asking if he could stay with me since Keisha had thrown him out. I blocked his number. 3 days later, I got a message from Keisha asking to meet again. We sat in a coffee shop, 2 pregnant women, well, 1 pregnant, 1 with a baby, connected by the worst possible circumstances. She told me she was filing for divorce, that her lawyer would be contacting me about establishing formal child support for Zarya. She wasn't angry at me anymore, at least, not only at me. We were both deceived, she said, with a dignity I can't imagine having in her position. But the difference is, you didn't know about me when this started. He knew exactly what he was doing to all of us. As I sit here tonight, with Zarya asleep in her crib and my future completely uncertain, I can't help thinking about choices and consequences. I'm not sorry I have my daughter, she's the best thing in my life. I'm not even really sorry the truth came out, it needed to. But I am sorry for the pain I helped cause, for the family that's now broken, for believing all those lies because I wanted them to be true. Deshawn keeps trying to contact me from new numbers, alternating between blaming me and promising that now we can finally be together, for real. But watching how easily he lied to Keisha for years, to me for months, and to this Jasmine woman for who knows how long, how can I ever trust anything he says again? The hardest part is knowing that our choices have affected 4 innocent children who didn't ask for any of this mess. So no, I don't regret telling Keisha the truth that day. I just regret that it took me finding out about another woman to finally do the right thing.